Okay, welcome back to this presentation, which we call Flare 2012, specifically the powerful node-based 3D compositing presentation. And you may already know about Flame Premium, our ultimate tool set with VFX, grading, and our timeline tool. And Flare is a software-only tool set that has the full Flame batch and action creative tool set, working interconnected perhaps with your CG tools. We're going to focus in on a CG intensive project on this particular presentation. Let me play this final. Thanks to Art Jail.
Hey, Melissa.
Yeah?
I think this is impossible.
Wanna head back?
Yeah. What was that?
Oh, nothing.
Cool, so thanks again to Art Jail for that content. You can really think about with a job like this, how a lot of the challenges relate to the combination of 3D assets with live action footage, stock footage, stills. They all need to be combined into the job. And specifically, you might be working with OpenEXR media, you might be working with floating point media, all handleable within the system here. But also, you might be doing multiple versions. So you might have pre-comps that feed into a master comp. It's a very iterative, potentially complex process of updates. We have really powerful tool sets within the Autodesk family. Specifically, we're going to drill into our Autodesk FBX format and the higher level functions of animated geometry cache, working with special textures such as the substance textures in the post-production process that are handed through from our CG part. So let me start you off here in the Flame Premium. And I'm going to drill into some of the CG functionality, integrating CG with live action plates. I have just a quick example here to start you off, where you can see I could take a couple of pieces here, put them into our batch environment, and then these pieces can then be used as a way of an introduction into our batch procedural compositing environment. So this is the environment that's available in Flame Premium, but also in Flare. And it's where we might just connect things together. So for example, I might just blend this guy right over a background. So this is just a simple process of combination. We can get into our Photoshop blend modes if we wanted to here to see like a blended version of the two. But specifically, you might want to do stuff like make some masks to be able to combine that stuff. So if we just pull out a mask here and point at actually this plate, you could see how I could draw myself a shape, and indeed I could track it as well if I wanted to be able to get the outline of different parts of the scene here. And I'm just going to outline the windshield here so you can see how this could work as a way of just drawing a mask. Of course, if we view the result of this, if I just connect in my mask here, you can see how that just defines that right there. If I want to, I'll just set a point of context here and pull out a paint node. We also have a complete paint system in the system here that allows us to then look at essentially if we come in and look at a result of what we're working on here, let's just paint looking at this for now, and you'll be able to see how this could work out. If I just look at my context view here and start with a little paint, you'll be able to see how I could just paint with black here and really just dial in. If you just imagine I could just paint through here. Let me just take a look at this kind of an effect, perhaps to just sort of blend in how this works so as to be able to sort of simplify or combine these different procedural techniques into our, right in our procedural compositing. So let me just show you some of the pieces that we saw coming together. What we have here is some CG elements coming from 3ds Max in this situation. And on this particular piece, you can see that we have a bunch of pieces coming in. This one right here actually uses a float render. So this is actually a OpenEXR render, which is correctly viewed, of course, in that scene linear color space. You see the power of float is really to have detail that could be visually clipped, but can be brought back into the visual range. So it's not really clipped. So that's just what I wanted to mention there. We have our plate being composited here. And of course, we're using the different passes that are available to us to do things like combine in ambient occlusion. So that's something that can just be blended into our scenes. If I just show you a little bigger here, you'll be able to see how I can blend in my ambient occlusion mix. But I also have my normals connected. And what that means is that I can use the surfaces of the shapes to then build myself a sort of a relighting rig here, where you can see how I can change the left-hand light or the right-hand light here freely to be able to really nuance kind of the lighting. But of course, we're still working with just flat renders at this point. So if I turn you around, you can see how this works, where you are still just working with renders overlaid over your live action. But what if, essentially, you needed more than that? You needed more control over your content. And that's where our FBX story begins. Because we have a bunch of techniques that we can use to combine the flat renders with real geometries. So you can imagine there was a geometry for the rocks, and there was a geometry for the astronaut, as well as all the other pieces in this scene, that I can bring into the post-production process and use either just the geometry that's there and the textures that are there if I want, or I can customize those. I can change them. We have a set of material libraries that are generated in 3D called the substance texture generators, and they can be edited and adjusted and replaced if I like here in post-production. Also, I can do what we call diffuse wrapping. So that's what you're going to see over the next couple of minutes here. The ability to pick and choose between different techniques to really dial in the way your CG looks. So I'm just importing an FBX here. And what that is actually, if you look again at this scene, you'll notice that these are individual points. These are actually live geometry. So you can see how I can adjust them. I can even go and use my working view again, so you can see the camera perspective along with these geometries live in the scene. So it's quite powerful then, if you think about it, to be able to then have total control over these elements. So if I just come back here, you can see there's my elements in the scene. If I zoom in a little bit on these rocks can then be further modified. So if I just come over to this perspective here, you'll be able to see all the different pieces in the equation. So there's my rock, and over here is the geometry that generates that rock. And you'll see that it's hanging off of it as a material, which is a live organic thing. It's not just a texture. It is a substance generator, which is a procedurally generated texture. So it's generated by math. That means that I can come in here and make changes to it if I like. So, for example, I can adjust the overall look of this if I want. Let me just zoom in a bit more on my rock. Of course, the lighting is all the more powerful when you have actual geometries to work with rather than models. But I can even come in here and actually just completely replace my rock. So I might just scan all the libraries that I share here with the 3D animation applications and pick one that works better for me. So I might just take this other rock texture, and what you'll be able to see, let me just turn the light around again so that we've got a bit of light on our scene, and you'll be able to see just how we can get some interesting kind of effects here by doing things like customizing this material. Let's add more moss to our rock. If I actually turn on my my anti-aliasing here in the scene, you'll be able to see how we can get a photoreal result here, even though this is just working from a geometry with textures, to be able to do whatever we like. We can change it up, change the way it reacts. Let's reduce the amount of mud here, of moss, so that it's a clear asteroid. As we know that moss doesn't grow on a rolling stone, and that would be one example here. But another technique then that we could use is actually to discard the original materials and use the render. So what I mean by that is, you can see over here, if I just show you my front view, this is the render that came in, right? And we're going to use the pieces of it to suit ourselves. So if I just roll down later in the shot here where you can see the asteroid, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a diffuse space wrap. So what that means is I'm able to take my texture here and wrap it from the point of view of the camera. So what that does is that actually gives me an even better solution. So I have now my rocks that are wrapped by their own render. So if that makes any sense, this is kind of the best of both worlds, right? So where you can take your render, it's being projected on, so you can see if I move it side to side, it goes out of alignment. But by leaving it in that default view here, I've kind of got a situation where I've got exactly what the 3D artist wanted and all the textures that they defined, but with the power of complete 360 lighting of that geometry. So that's really cool. The next thing I wanted to show you is how I'm just going to actually just collapse this guy here and bring in our astronaut. So coming back to our perspective view here, our main view, you can see where we're at right now. The lights are obviously in complete control, as I just said, of how that looks, so a backlighting effect or whatever we want. But then if we bring in our astronaut, I'm going to actually just import this FBX here. And this is our, there's a bunch of pieces. You can combine them in different ways as it suits you. So let's just grab our astronaut, bring him in. And you can see, you might remember from the final, that he sits in place there. He is actually an animated mesh geometry. So you can see as he's drifting, if I just put him into like a wireframe view for a second, you'll be able to see what I mean by that. So if I just take my geometry and select him in here, let's just take this geometry and temporarily put him into wireframe view. And you can see what I mean, the fact that this guy, just like the rocks, is a piece of geometry. You can bring in hundreds of thousands of polygons into your post environment here, and then choose how you want to work with it. So let's go ahead and just nuance our lights a little further to get something that's going to work for us. So if we just take down the intensity of some of these lights, let's also just adjust the materials here a little bit more. And you can see how I've got a combination of techniques now. I've got the rocks wrapped, and I've got the astronaut in here. And I just want to show you one more functionality that's really cool when working with these kind of tools. So you can see how they're all being affected by the same lights. His textures are wrapped on there. So if I change that, you can see how the UVs are editable here. But specifically, what we might do then is to deal with a little problem in this shot. You might remember as we come through here, if we go to this section in the scene, there's actually a situation where it doesn't quite work as a shot because his feet kind of cut through the car. Now, instead of having to ask for a re-render at this point, I can just take the geometry here and adjust it myself. So I have a package of tools here that includes a deformation mesh. And this is a great functionality to be able to then take this and put a kind of a cage around it if I'd like. So we have lots of control over the size of the cage and the way that it influences. So let's just line it up here and put it kind of down like that. And what I'll do is I'll just select these points and I'll just set a kind of a neutral point before and after. I'm setting a keyframe there. And then I'll set another one as we come past. And then in the middle there, what I would like to do is just have it so that right when he touches the car here, we want to just kind of move him upwards. So you can see the kind of level of control I have over my geometry here to actually be able to just manipulate it without having to ask for an adjustment. So if I just turn my icons off, you'll be able to see how as it comes through, he's just going to kick up his legs a little bit and then back down for that little finishing touch to really put this into shape. So hopefully that gives you an idea of working with FBX materials. The next thing we want to show you actually is working with a complicated versioning situation where a shot could be handled by 3 or 4 or 5 artists working together. And I actually just have a backplate for a shot here which looks like this. And you might remember that that the idea here was to create a kind of a edge of the world type effect. This is what you might start with, right? So this is just the backplate, and I'm going to go ahead and perform a camera track or a data analysis of this scene. Actually, I'm just going to drop it in to my action environment here, and by just using a tool that we call the mono analyzer, what we have here is the ability then to to connect right in to, if you like, rebuild the camera scene that we're looking at. So just to be clear, this is a type of track that allows us to then analyze the entire scene and rebuild a virtual camera looking at it. This is the foundation building block of being able to then integrate 3D elements into the scene, as well as then to be able to use it for my own compositing. So if you look at the points that have been generated here, we can pick and define exactly how we want this to look. So if I'm just going to recalibrate my camera here at a focal length that I know, and what you'll see here is that we get a bunch of points available to us. If we look in our working view here, we have a whole bunch of points available, and hopefully you can really get the idea that this has analyzed the ground plane, which looks flat. It's also analyzed pieces from the car and all static objects within. So this is great. This is a great functionality to then work with. So if we just come back to look in here, you can see the next thing I might do is to actually build points that are useful to me and extract them from the data. So if I take 1, 2, 3, 4 points where I think the edge of the world should be and create what we call a point cloud, you'll see that this is a great way of being able to then define a bunch of points. So let me just grab this. I'm just going to switch these to crosses and enlarge them so you can see what we've got. And that's really all I need out of my tracker myself. Although the camera is, like I said, a valuable asset that needs to be exported. So I'm going to actually export that so that that can be used by the CG guys, whichever application is using. In this case, we're working with Maya. We'll see that in just a minute. And but while I'm here, I want to just essentially give you an idea of how you can kind of visualize this process just by taking a G-mask, as we call it. That's our garbage mask right inside of Action. Attach it to that point cloud, which I'm going to tell that point cloud, hey, I want you to align anything I put in here to that plane, so that sequence of 4. And by just then drawing a simple shape in here, what you'll be able to see is that I can get kind of a cool looking result here. Let me just use my G-mask view here so that you can see what I mean by that. Actually, what I want is this view. And then what I can do is I can actually draw right into the scene here following that plane, and you'll see how this orients itself automatically. Let me just send it over there. And you can see how when I then turn the scene, this is a great way of being able to just define an edge point that I would refine a bit more, but you can see how it's locked down in the scene. So these are the foundation tools. Let me just jump ahead so you can see how you might go ahead and do a little more with this scene, such as doing a background replacement. So this is a background element that's tracked into the scene. So that's just dropped right in there. We also are using keying here to actually key our element into the background here if we want, a combination of keys and masks. This is the 3D keyer. That's one of the big powerful tools of the Flame Premium. But specifically, we wanted to sort of see how that comes together to make what is basically a foundation layer or a foreground for your composite. So at this point, I'm done with this little pre-comp. And what I need to do is check in my asset. And what I mean by that is I'm going to output this shot as an asset that other artists in the building can use. We do that via our export node here, which includes the setup and a versioning system that is driven by an XML database of information about this shot. So what do we mean by this? Well, we call it artist-driven versioning. And I want to explain a little bit about this. Starting from the bottom, your source assets come into the building, and they work their way into the first application that uses them, an animation application or a compositing application. Subcomps are created. In this case, in the situation where you use a Flare or Flame Premium to create these subcomps, what we call the level 2 versioning. And then they're iterated and reversioned, and they make their way perhaps into a smaller set of subcomps, which then finally make their way into a master comp. So it's kind of like an anatomy of a shot. And we want to just give you an idea of how this works. We are actually a team of 4 here, but we're going to come to that in just a second. I want to show you how the assets that I made are able to be opened directly in, and it's a smart asset. What I mean by that is that masked backplate that I just created is a living, breathing thing with this versioning structure. so that I can view it, and you can see I've actually output 2 different versions with the key in slightly different places. So it's more than just a piece of media, right? It's a powerful tool. Let's look at other guys in the team here. So I'm working on this. I've got one piece of the puzzle, but Daryl over there is actually working in Maya, working on our cliffs.
Yeah, so what we've got here, or what our client actually did, is they took that camera track that came out of Flame, and they've blocked out some basic geometry that they're then projecting those original plates back onto, and they're using that to kind of add a little bit of elements where those rocks start to fall off. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've set up a few different versions. So we've got a version without the rocks falling, a version with a rock, kind of dropping off a big rock, and then we have a third version that basically has some grass and some smaller pebbles. These layers or versions also have render passes associated with them. So if we bring up the pass system inside of Maya, you can see that for each one of these versions, we're rendering out ambient occlusion, depth, motion vectors, and normals, and that information will get passed back over to Will, to Flame, I should say.
Cool. Toba here is in the middle of a background element. So he's working on a laptop actually on the Flare. And the Flare can be run on multiple different hardware platforms. You can actually then see how he doesn't necessarily have the pieces that I have or the pieces that Daryl had. He's building us a background, a sky scene or a space scene. And what he'll do is he'll also check in an asset. So he's using that smart export node, if you like. It's a way of outputting your media with the information that created it. So the whole batch is output as like a sidecar file. And this idea of versioning is intricate to the way that works. So Toba, if you wouldn't mind just kicking out a version for us.
All right. So first thing is the clip name and
Yep. He can actually build a folder structure.
all right, the version number and the date. Yeah, I put on. Just render out.
Go for it. If you want to
Yep.
name it Tuesday, he named his
yeah,
comp
Tuesday.
Tuesday. So even though he's just started processing there, you can see that there's nothing up our sleeves here. We're able to come all the way down here and open that Tuesday comp. And as it comes in here, what we'll be able to see is there's just a few frames of that coming in right now. And that's going to fill up as we go along. But let's move on to look at what Bill's doing. He's actually putting the CG and live action together. So he has my pre-comp. Bill's mine.
One here. So let's bring this this other comp together. So what we have is that version, first version that Daryl had. And it's kind of a little bit static here. So what I want to do, if we look at the final of that so far, is I want to get that new updated version. So with the actual EXRs here, which if I actually just show you that there's all the different elements of that EXR, I'm going to just go right back out and find my bookmark here where I see the updated version. So this is the fourth version that Daryl just created for me. So what I'm going to do is load that back in, and what's interesting now is it actually replaced that shot with the new shot. So you can see now we've got this element kind of falling off. So that's the new version. But what was nice is I didn't have to remake all the connections. It actually rethreaded based on the naming convention of the individual passes. It rethreaded those back through for me. So now I have in my final comp that new version automatically updated. And now I can just do something like reposition the lights. Perhaps go in and use the normals to adjust the lighting, the intensity, or the color, and then send this and export that back out and check that in with Will.
Great, yeah. So as he said, he checks in an asset here, which I would then get, but also I could just be reviewing here in what we think of as a kind of master comp here. You can see how things are working, but I might decide that I need a revision. Right, so I'm the artist that's sitting with the client. I need a quick revision. So Toba, could you make me a version 2?
All right. Just moments.
So then just by simply making a change and hitting process again, he's then outputting a version 2 clip. And if I come in here, come back to me, you'll be able to see that I have still his version 1, but I just come down here and say, hey, check for updated versions. And you can see there's a new source to update, which now has the choices. So if I just come in here, I'm actually going to look into this clip, and you'll be able to see my version 2 versus my version 1 sky. So this is really the power of our artist-driven versioning system. Not only can you actually see these live comps update as you need them, but you can also take a clip if you want to, and you can go ahead and append it live. So you can see here, this one, maybe I don't have time to go back to Bill. I just want to bring it out myself. So like I said, there's a sidecar file attached to the comp, and what it does is it outputs this reference comp for me, which is essentially everything that I had before, right? So if you think about it, if I ungroup this, what I'm going to see here is Bill's work, which if I just position it over here, you get the idea that this whole pre-comp feeds this, right? So you could see how I could go back if I wanted and make any modifications that I wanted to either comp, like let's say I wanted to nuance that light, or I wanted to work on masks right in the deep, deep parts of the pre-comp. So that's our story. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of how this could work when working with all these different technologies together. Not only the FBX story and the EXRs working into compositing, but also a powerful artist-driven versioning system. So that's our presentation for Flare 2012. Thanks for listening.